Alex, perhaps you could tell us what sort of things i.ai was looking into and why.
Yes, so we were very keen to explore a number of basic approaches. And the first was how could we do things faster? How could we save money? That's to say, how could we reduce the number of people who we needed to perform certain tasks in government? And then we were also looking at how we could generally improve the quality of services. And obviously, when you first sort of hear about AI, kind of hope that it's going to immediately come out and solve cancer and everything will be better. But it doesn't. Obviously, it didn't quite work like that. The first thing we started looking at was correspondence, and that there are some departments that have a huge volume of correspondence, which is actually pretty similar. And but you have to employ hundreds, perhaps in some cases thousands of people, in order to go through all of that and to generate responses. And we thought, if you can crack the correspondence issue, and where then that's something that you can build once and apply to all government departments, and you'll save a bit of time, you'll save a lot of time and a bit of money. And at the outset, that was there were some problems with doing that, but actually now it's a very straightforward thing to do, and it can immediately identify the hard cases that need to go through a team. So, but that was sort of the foothills. The big thing that we were talking about were in order really to try and get the attention of the Treasury was fraud, specifically benefit fraud, in that the government employs thousands and thousands of people in order to detect benefit fraud, which gives you an idea of how much money is lost in benefit fraud. If you can have thousands and thousands of people on the payroll in order to, you can still recoup your costs. And we'd started the work by the time of the election. We'd started the work with DWP that ultimately will drive the number of people you need right down, but will also be able to identify those some particularly complex cases that would have previously required a lot of human hours in order to identify. In that, as you'll know, AI can be very good at spotting anomalies that aren't immediately apparent to humans.
Well, I mean, this is so. I just wanted to clarify, because I think when people talk about AI, there is a very large variety of things they could be talking about, right? LLMs are the things that most people will immediately jump to, but as you point out, spotting of patterns in large statistical sort of correlated data sets, you can do that in all sorts of ways. So this body is not just doing LLMs; it's trying to bring machine learning generally into government.
Exactly, and one of the areas which gained results for us very quickly, which came out of nowhere, wasn't in our initial planning. It was just a conversation that the i.ai team had happened to have with some people in the NHS, was on prescriptions. And at first, there was an idea that we might look for prescription fraud. But what the team realized in conversations with people in health was that there are lots of people who have been on prescriptions for a long time. And let's say that they just have an ongoing condition and they renew their prescription, their doctor renews their prescription. But very often in those cases, since they started on their prescription, a new and better and or cheaper drug has emerged, but they are on the prescription for the old one. And the AI, the learning that the team was able to build in the space of a couple of weeks, could go through huge numbers of records and identify where people had been very quickly, where people had been on prescriptions for too long, which is a problem in itself, where people had been on prescriptions where they had those prescriptions had now been superseded by cheaper drugs and or better drugs. And that was, it was a wonderful, wonderful sort of sideline that came out of it. And on the LLMs, the main thing that again was sort of trailblazing at the time, but is now, I think, more sort of more routine use, was that as a minister you often get dumped on your desk at 7:00 at night a 500-page report, and before it can go into your box, your private office is supposed to read it and give you a note that goes on top. And it the team i.ai built something that we call Red Box, which effectively speeded up that work by a huge margin, to the point where, obviously you still need a private office. You need a private office that has the good sense to be able to look at your summaries and look at the questions that are coming out of the LLM and check that they're within the bounds of reason. But it meant that as a minister, you could get an early insight into long documents much faster than was previously possible. And then the other thing that was going on, again, more in the LLM space, was work with call centers, and how looking with, I think it was with Citizens Advice Bureau, how you could help people who understand the problem that they were hearing from members of the public, and work out better how to give them advice and triage their cases where necessary. And that was so we weren't looking to replace people. We were looking to give them additional insight which they could share with the public, and more reassurance on when to send them to a specialist.
Calum, you and I were at a hackathon.
It's exactly
recently.
what. Yeah.
You're thinking exactly the same thing. We're at a hackathon, and it was for state functions, and different government departments and agencies had submitted problems to these young hackers that they wanted solved. And in fact, one that I think was executed particularly successly, maybe it won.
I don't think it didn't win. The Treasury Busters won, but it was they came second. I think.
What was Treasury Busters?
Treasury Busters was it was a big hammer, and it was a tool that walked people through the planning submission process. So it was a cloud text sort of text collaboration tool that used LLMs in the background to help you formulate these planning proposals and cost proposals for big pitches. They're people who had worked in the Treasury, and their view was
fascinating.
What was it? The Green Book process?
Or the Green Book process.
Yeah, the Green Book, exactly, and that they wanted to help people get through that. But yeah,
and this one that
we should say this is the SOTA. This is the SOTA hackathon, the
Society for Technological Advancement, and this one that sprang to mind for both me and Calum was, I think, basically an AI call handler for a hospital, and the hospital found that its call handlers were so overwhelmed members of the public calling up with things that were like very easily batched.
Yep.
So they could free up administrative time by having an AI. Anyway, I have one important question. I'm asking for a friend. What are the giveaways for benefits fraud?
The giveaways.
Yeah.
What is it? I don't think I should.
Could my Motability BMW be threatened?
Well,
by
look, it's clear that people have hacked the benefit system, right?
Yeah.
And it's not entirely impossible. We know that social media is disseminating these hacks, but it's not entirely possible that a form of AI has been behind identifying how you get through the system, right? And certainly the risk in future is that this is what happens. That any system, any gatekeeping system we have, or government has for funding, is cracked either by clever individuals or by individuals using AI. Say, if you answer the following questions in the following way, the computer will say yes, or the human will say yes.
It's sad, really, because we have historically had a generous system that relied basically on people's restraint.
That's right.
And we face the prospect of having to be far more robust in how we filter people or check.
Yes.
In order to prevent, as you say, these hacks that have been disseminated via social media.
No, that's right. So I'm not going to. I don't think I'll give you the keys to welfare.
I'll keep the keys from my
I wanted to ask about the thing you said about the prescriptions, because what's interesting there is many of those things, as with for example, being on a prescription too long. I mean, that's an if statement. If person has had this prescription for longer than that, flag it. And it seems to me that's not an AI problem so much as a willingness of government departments to share data. And I mean, this is the problem, right, that the Reform Party have had with their councils, is that despite being willing to go, gangbusters and smash things up, the councils have refused to give them access to these data sets. When you were in government, did you find that departments were willing to share their data?
Well, I mean, some departments were better than others. There's no doubt about it. And I think one of the problems I had with government, and I saw it when I was working in Number 10, and I saw it again when I was working in the Cabinet Office, is that a lot of departments treat their data a bit like the family silver. Just, or it's something. It's one of the things you have that you can negotiate with. When you're in arguments with other departments or with the Treasury, your data is you can. Well, I might do this for you, but if I give you all of the data, well, then you might be able to do it without me, and I'd much rather you needed me. And Ian Duncan Smith has some very interesting tales from his days in DWP with his negotiations with the Treasury. He said the Treasury needed DWP to do their calculations on welfare. And when I wanted to, I could put my foot down and say, well, if you don't help me, I'm not going to help you. And and I think that whilst that helped Ian bring forward welfare reform, a more mature system of government would give Number 10 access to everything automatically. And we are still too far away from having that sort of attitude to and architecture for government data.
Because that was the hope, right, of the Situation Room, Cummings' big plan
for
having
that's right.
But it was stymied, right, because he couldn't agree these data sharing.
No, that's right. And I think you have to be, Dom is pretty forceful, but I think you have to be even more forceful, and that you would have to come in and create a legal requirement for different government departments to share their data with the centre. And there's no getting around that. There's no, that Laura ended up running a number of these dashboards, and it's very striking that they have always come under pressure from different parts of the system, and when it's so obvious that they should exist, and a number of times have folded under the weight of that pressure from other parts of the system. So I think you've got the future of government has to involve the centre knowing what's going on and being able to do its own analysis and being able to run its own numbers. When I worked in the policy unit in Number 10 in 2016, and I worked for Boris Johnson as his PPS, and you would have conversations where, for example, when Boris was preparing for PMQs, you would ask, insert department here, let's say for the sake of argument, health, saying the Prime Minister may be asked about the following questions, give us the data on this subject. And, the clock would wind forward, and 11 o'clock would come, and then 12 o'clock would come, and the Prime Minister would stand up and answer questions, and the data hadn't come through. And that sort of approach, even when it's the Prime Minister asking, is no way to run a modern government.
Is it still the case that Keir Starmer today won't be able to get hold of data that he wants for PMQs?
Well, I mean, if Keir's given the data, he never gives it to us at PMQs, so I think...
you're often opposite him at the dispatch box.
Well, I'm not... yes, I'm sitting opposite him, but the truth is, at the moment, I see no sign that this government has solved that problem. The Cabinet Office many months ago said, we got this plan for change, and we got these mission statements, and there's going to be this sort of fantastic online dashboard of all the data, and no sign of it. Unable to answer questions about when it will come, and that is a pretty simple task. That is not, in the future you've got to have a centre that has is the repository for all government data and can get live data on lots of things that we don't currently have live data for. The famous thing that is sort of has become a key issue that has become more famous recently is that we don't have any data on the number of people who leave the country. That there's that Tony Blair cancelled the reporting requirement, and so all of our exit data is guessed. And that a sensible government would, a future government would know how many people are coming to the country each day and know how many people are leaving.
It's said that the best estimates actually come from footfall in supermarkets, which would suggest that we're getting closer to 70 million in this country than...
Do you mean 80 million?
Sorry, 80 million.
Yeah, it's a sort of...
Sorry, you look away for 5 minutes, then we imported another kind of 10 million.
Well, but remember, when we left the EU, it turned out that the government's understanding of how many EU citizens were living in Britain was wildly out. It was hugely out, and it is a very odd fact that that the government doesn't know how many people are living here.
Does it just kind of feel icky to be monitoring the comings and goings of immigrants? Is that why?
I don't know why it was. I assume it was originally scratched as a small cost-saving measure when there was free movement within. We had free movement within the EU, and it was probably deemed to be unnecessary. But it is necessary. So you've got in the future we must have much better data. We must have one part of government that can see it all.
I mean, it's interesting that you bring up the Ian Duncan Smith example, because that's a political act, right? That
yes.
it is not just a civil service seeking to preserve its position. It is a useful political tool.
No, that's right, and but that's departments are in constant negotiation with each other, and like any other organisations, they will use whatever tools they have at their disposal. And I just think there are some things that probably need to be taken off the table.
Yeah, sort of state proprioception, sort of to know what the various limbs are doing.
And Alex, what is the current state of i.ai, and what does the future hold for it?
Well, i.ai has, I think, very sadly moved out of Cabinet Office into DCIT as part of the new government's reorganisation. I think that was the wrong move. Cabinet Office sits at the centre of government and feeds into all government departments in a way that DCIT can't. But I think the few and so I think it's losing some of its potential, and I worry that the initial startup excitement that we had in the year to the general election has dissipated. But I think that the future for AI in government is enormous, but perhaps not in as sort of an exciting way as people imagine. And that I think a lot of it is quite straightforward. That a government should first decide what it wants to do and what it doesn't want to do, which all governments are bad at. That you go through and you should ruthlessly take out the things that are not a priority and say we're not going to do them anymore. And then having done that with what is left, you should probably go through and see what process you can simplify. And having done that, you should go through and see what you can automate. And I think that's where AI will come in and play a much larger role, particularly in a system which has good data and good data architecture. And then what you will find that you've done is you've saved a bunch of money. you by getting rid of by improving your processes and by getting rid of a bunch of people, and that means that with the people you have left, you can invest in them, and you need to build wildly more productive and intelligent HR systems than the ones we currently have. But you end up with a future civil service that is smaller, better qualified, better paid, and more effective. And that's a neat idea. I mean, it's that's exciting. And then I think that the other bits where I'm less well qualified to talk are potentially, as you were saying earlier with the NHS, if in the future, if a lot of people can effectively talk to an AI doctor without having to see a human, those are big productivity gains. If people can get very high quality legal advice, for cases in their lives, and an effective readout of what their chances are of success are, and are then told, would you like to settle now? And maybe even for certain types of legal case, you can see the AI judge immediately and it's done, or you can join the queue for the human judge. But so you make your choice about whether you want something instantaneous or whether you want to join a longer queue. Then those are very very big efficiencies. They may throw up their own problems as well, but they're potentially very big efficiencies that could help improve people's lives and make things cheaper for the state.
Probably go for the AI judge when I next send an intemperate tweet. Human judge when I next commit benefits fraud.
You shouldn't be finding yourself in front of a judge for an intemperate tweet. Is the truth?
No, obviously, getting AI trained people who can work with these systems is difficult. And you were telling us before we started recording about what it took to pull these systems kind of out of the normal civil service bureaucracy. Why are we in this situation where, I mean, as you said, right, you need to be able to hire people at 150, 100 grand, whatever salaries. Why do we have this position? Why are we in this situation? And is the answer just continuously having these, bypasses, workarounds?
So no, I think that you have to shake up the way that employment works in the civil service. I was very fortunate in that the Prime Minister at the time, Rishi Sunak, wanted to support this, and Oliver Dowden, who was my boss in the Cabinet Office, wanted to do this, and between them they got the Treasury to concede that we could step outside of normal employment process and normal salary bands, without which we just couldn't have gotten anywhere. I mean, we were still asking people to take often a very big pay cut to come and work for us, because although we were paying about £150,000 in a lot of instances, people were earning more on the outside, but they were prepared to come because it was exciting and because people want to do something for the country and want to feel like they're building something exciting for the future, and that was very very reassuring. But on the general point, I think you have to have a system where secretaries of state have much more leeway on the terms and conditions with which they hire people. If I would much rather have 5 brilliant people working for me than 50 people who are okay, and I think that I think that a lot of companies, modern companies, understand that dynamic, and government doesn't yet. Government says, here's the salary cap for a role of this type. Well, what do you mean a role of this type? Well, a role of this type means that this is just someone who's a programmer who isn't managing anyone. I don't want them to manage anyone. I want them to to make world-leading AI applications, and I want us to acknowledge that we're asking them to do it at a fraction of the cost that they would get in the private sector. So and if secretaries of state could say, I'm going to build a team, and this is what it looks like. And the Treasury has a right to come along occasionally and say, you spent all that money last year. We've got nothing to show for it. So I think you should probably have a conversation with the Prime Minister about your future. But no, we have tied ourselves up in a form of bureaucracy which is there to make things, to de-risk certain things. And in de-risking, we have also taken off a lot of the opportunity.
This seems to be the pattern that we see over and over again, isn't it? That in order to prevent sort of the obvious and easy to spot things like, say, I don't know, hiring your mates kind of thing, we have instead produced a system that is far, far worse at dealing with the unknown unknowns. And actually, I've had friends who have gone through civil service recruitment and civil service promotions who, for example, might have wanted to stay in the area that they're in, have got really good at it, in HMRC, say, and have gained all this tax experience, but now they have to go off and go to DEFRA, for example.
Yeah, it's mad, right? And part of the problem is that if you want to progress past a certain point in the civil service, you have to become a manager. And it's not to say that we don't want very good managers in the civil service. Of course we do. But we also should want seriously good specialists who feel that, and they should be able to feel that if they do well and they're of great value to the organisation, that value will be rewarded. And at the moment it isn't. Or at the moment it's very hard for it to be recognised in that way. And I remember, it's not a very good example, but I'll give it to you anyway. A friend of mine who ran a sales company in the Northwest a few years ago. He said, a lot of the people I employ, they earn more than me. That's fine by me, because they're earning more than me because they're doing a very good job. And I think that we don't really have that mentality in government. That there is a pyramid, the well-paid people at the top, and they're in charge, in inverted commas, and below them are people who are of less financial value to the state. But that isn't right. There are a lot of people who do jobs in government whose role is incredibly valuable and who save the taxpayer an enormous amount of money. We would like to have more people like that, and it should be, and when we find them, we should be able to hold on to them and value them.
Isn't this partly a question of public taste? The moment that some government project does badly, the salaries of the people who run it will be in the Daily Mail.
Yeah,
and they'll be smaller than corporate salaries, but people will still think it's an outrage.
Well, I think if somebody's done a bad job, it's a perfectly fair response to say, and they were being paid a lot of money to do that bad job. I think what's wrong is if people are doing a very good job in a very difficult area, if they get criticised for being paid a lot. And that's, I think that obviously, look, we want the amount of money that is spent on government as a whole to go down. It needs to go down in a meaningful way. But as I say, if you handle HR and technology properly, you can end up with a smaller, better civil service that will afford you savings, and some of those savings can go on paying decent salaries to brilliant people.
It's also right, because part of the deal you take is you're also probably not going to get fired, right? There's a stability and a safety. So the system is almost selecting for people who prefer to be paid less and less risk of being fired, which, it doesn't take a genius to work out what kind of person that incentivizes to go into and stay in that system. That it would be fine if you were being paid, and I think the public rightfully understands they're being paid a lot, they've failed, and they're also probably not going to get fired and suffer the consequences, right? If you mess up, okay, that probably means it's you're out of that job. That seems a far fairer attitude to...
No. And at its worst, the system actively seeks to hide the people who have made mistakes. I mean, it's not a problem that politicians have. When we make mistakes, it's very obvious to everyone. And
well, unless there's a super injunction.
This is true. And I think there are in some very limited cases, super injunctions can be justified for short periods of time. I don't think they can be justified for long periods of time. But that said, there are some things that should be subject to state secrets, and it doesn't mean that all information should be fully available.
Care to give a view on the particular super injunction to which we
Well,
refer?
I was just alluding to it. That I think I don't know the details of the case. I found out about this at the same time that everybody else found out about it in the papers, but I can certainly see why there's a moment where, if a list is you know that a list has gone out to places it shouldn't do, it is not a good idea to tell the world that there is a lister now available on the dark web, and I can see why you would want to keep that quiet. But I don't understand why the super injunction was extended past that initial period. But anyway, before we got on to the importance of super injunctions, we